Hey, how's it going, guys? Ancient Rune here, back with another Borderlands 3 build video, and today I'll be going over my status effect Zane build called Alchemical Agent. This build takes advantage of Our Man Flynt having a double dipping effect for dots that help make super strong status effects that aren't usually possible on Zane. The dot that Our Man Flynt procs while ADSing with an elemental weapon looks at the impact damage and then multiplies it by 20% of that impact damage, and then you also get the regular gun bonuses. So at the impact, you will be having the card damage, that 20%, different types of gun damage, crit, elemental V1, V2, splash, element matchup, and then with the Our Man Flynt dot, that will also get those global bonuses, which is elemental V1, V2, and then it'll also get stats effect bonuses, which we can only get on Zane without anointment would be executor, but we're not really using on this build. So we're mainly looking at elemental V1, V2, and then of course element matchup will still apply here. So with all this, we are looking for guns that are splash, elemental, high base damage, or that high base hit, and then multi-pellet to help with our class mod of choice, the Hustler, for better crits uptime. I also want to give a shout out to Stone Swan and Quag for testing stuff and getting inspiration from their builds with Our Man Flynt when this was first found out back in, like, what was it, April? Crazy that it's taken this long, but this is such a fun build. The save file will be found in my Discord, which is linked down below, and I hope you guys enjoy. Alright, and for the gear here, we have a bunch of weapons, but first I want to go over the anointment. This is the elemental crit hit status effect. Elemental crit hits can cause status effects of that element to explode, creating a nova that deals 500% of the status effect's damage. So this is also double dipping. The base damage of this explosion is based off of the status effect. So you apply that status effect gets all those global bonuses, then you hit an elemental crit of the element of the dot, and then you'll get the damage formula again with that 500% increase as well. So it's just a crazy strong explosion if you have a really good dot. And since we can apply really good dots with Our Man Flynt, it's just the perfect thing to add to this. It is a huge increase. And so you'll see a lot of the time we'll have radiation guns here. Radiation is just for mobbing because of rad explosions. Whenever you kill a radiation enemy or enemy with a radiation dot on it, it will explode and it'll have like a huge explosion with radiation, and you can get that some really high damage. And that's what we're aiming for here. We use the Herald because it's multi-pellet, and then it's also splash, and it's just a strong gun with good base damage, and I like it. The Herald's fun. Then we have the projectile recursion. This works really well with the Hustler and Eraser. You'll see it used in Hustler, Racer, main focus builds with not dot stuff. Can proc a lot, and so it'll go around hitting enemies, applying status effects when it crits, and then if it crits the same enemy again, then it'll do this explosion. I should also mention that this anointment also has, I think, a 2-second cooldown, so you're not just constantly doing everything, but still you'll be doing good damage here. We have a plasma coil, very high base damage, splash, and rolls in radiation. You can use the shock version if you want, but I just use the radiation version. And then I just have another Herald here that I use for bossing. Then some other ones I'll go over. The wedding invitation's nice because it has a high base damage, and it also has a built-in debuff for fire and cryo damage. So that could be really nice with this fire. It just being normally fire, you can keep critting enemies and get those debuffs while also applying a dot, and then critting again for the explosion, and then having that debuff on there again. Redistributor is nice because it can chain. I've noticed it'll mainly just kill enemies around you besides the enemy you're shooting, which is fine. It just can sometimes be annoying. But yeah, really nice for mobbing and high dense areas. Anarchy is nice, but I find that Anarchy is mainly just killing enemies because it's the Anarchy. I like using the Moonfire because it has high base damage and high crit damage, and it's just really fun and satisfying to use. The Beacon's really nice because it has a big splash radius, and so you can shoot enemies, crit them, and then it'll kind of like hit them back, it'll hit the back of them as well. So you're kind of hitting them twice, but you also have that double dip of eraser hitting you or hitting them. Boomsticle's pretty fine. It's got a okay base damage of 20k, but it's multi-pellet and it's splash, which is just really nice. Backburner is really good for bossing, I found, and you could also use it for mobbing if you want, but it can be kind of difficult to do. But for stationary enemies, it can be really good, or just a high crowded area. Rowan's Call is pretty nice because the ricochets are splash, which can be really good for stuff around you. The slow hand isn't the best. It's got a high like regular dot, but not high base damage, and so I don't really like it that much. I even have some down here that are ×1, and I'm just not really feeling it with it. Then we have the kick chargers. This is a super high base damage, so if you can crit a boss with this, then you'll do really strong damage when first applying a dot with a crit and then hitting again for the elemental explosion. It'll just be insane damage. I really like the Queen's Call because it spawns projectiles that have a delay, so you can shoot an enemy, crit them, apply a dot, and then those projectiles will come back, have a chance to crit, and then that crit will cause the explosion, which is just really nice and satisfying being together. Then we have the Free Radical just because it's super high base damage, and it's also got those extra projectiles just like Queen's Call, making it also really good, but it just comes in shock. It's still really strong, but I prefer using a Herald or a Beacon over the Free Radical. I actually found the Radical and Beacon to be pretty similar, but if you went shock versus shock, the Free Radical would win probably. And then the Plague Barrel also has, of course, extra projectiles, so this is really good for just shooting in the air, and then projectiles will keep coming after enemies and critting them, and since they seek after them, you don't have to worry about aiming. And so if it hits an enemy twice, it'll just be another elemental explosion, and it's just super strong and also just very satisfying seeing it all explode together. And then for the shield, we go the Old God. You could also go Amp shields, but Amp isn't as good as the Old God, which gives elemental damage. Because we're doing this double dipping and some triple and possible quadruple dipping, which I'll go over in the skill tree, Amp damage is only for the first shot with the base damage, while elemental damage will go through everything from the base damage to the dot to the elemental explosion with eraser. So that's why you want to have an Old God with elemental damage instead of an Amp shield or like Revolter, because Revolter doesn't help with buffing your base damage. And then I have Absorb here, but you could also use Vagabond here if you want. Any parts can help. It doesn't really matter. Just getting the element is good. Absorb, even Recharge can be good, or Vagabond are probably the ones I'd go after. And for most shields I can roll those, I like to go after that. And then I have an It's Piss here that will just kind of sometimes be thrown, but it doesn't really matter. The grenade, It's Piss has a debuff, which will also be double dipping, so it's nice. You could use a Mesmer as well if you want. And then with these two, we use Terror for the V1 damage. Not really the fire rate, but the fire rate can be nice. The V1 damage will go through all the double dipping, triple dipping, all of that, making this just insane. And then we use a Hustler. Hustler is really good because you can't always easily crit an enemy, or you just can't crit them at all. And so Hustler just helps you be able to crit more to get those dots. You don't get crit damage bonuses, but it's still really, really good. The main thing you want to look out for is weapon type, splash damage, and then splash radius. Splash radius is for the red explosions. Otherwise, you mainly want splash damage and weapon type damage. I know it's Hustler with splash damage radius again. It sucks, but it's not as mandatory, but still really nice. And then for the Hustler, for the skill points, you do want to try and get brain freeze points, but it's not the end of the world because we still go it for in the skill tree. We use the brain free to freeze enemies so we can get icebreaker bonus. And then you could use the Executor because it has that increase to status effect damage and also just crit damage, which will go into natural crits for the dot, for the base damage you apply with Our Man Flynt. But then if you can't easily crit an enemy, then you can't really take advantage of that too much. But Executor is an option, but I much prefer Hustler. Then we go into Icebreaker Victory Rush. This is for so much damage formula. You get the Icebreaker V2 damage, the Victory Rush V1, you have the splash damage, and you have the elemental damage. You could also get weapon type damage, but I like to have the magazine here instead. You could also get action skill cooldown. You could get movement speed. There's a bunch of different versions. You'll see I have a bunch for different types, and then I have a snowdrift for bossing if I want to use that. Like if you can't freeze a boss or get the icebreaker bonus, that's where a snowdrift would be nice, so you can like slide really fast and shoot an enemy. I also have multiple elements of old gods here. We don't go any toboggan for any of this for like one shot stuff. We don't go that because again it's amp damage, so only applies to the initial shot. And so having this V1 and V2 and the elemental damage, the splash damage, potential weapon type, actually screw the weapon type, that's only initial shot. All this will be double, triple, quadruple dipping. I also don't go Company Man because it doesn't have damage formula for the dipping. It'll only affect the base damage of the crit. You can still get good passives, but having the Icebreaker Victory Rush part is just so much bigger than having a Company Man. It'll help the base damage for just general killing, but it won't help the dots and the explosions. Then for the skill tree, we'll start with Purple Tree since this is how the build is possible. Our Man Flynt, as I said at the beginning, it is double dipping status effect like Alchemical Agent from Wonderlands. It's based off of the base hit, and then it gets the damage bonuses again. So this is a double dip, but you could also have Eraser apply a status effect, which would be a triple dip, and then when you crit again, you will have a quadruple dip from elemental crit hits. Or you could just have a double dip from Our Man Flynt and then a triple dip from the explosion. You kind of have to line stuff up with Eraser, and then it's just RNG of what applies a good status effect. So it all depends on that. But mainly Our Man Flynt with the status effect explosion is the big damage part going on. We go Mana Focus just for accuracy. We don't need Deja Vu or Renegade. Headsman's Hand for the crit damage. Status effects can't crit, so this is only helping with the base damage of the crit. This can go through Eraser, so you could have a base hit from Eraser, get the crit damage, and then hit Our Man Flynt with most likely a Hustler crit, so it wouldn't get this crit damage. We go Commitment. It has some nice gun damage, but it's mainly for the action skill cooldown. This will help with our Mantis and Barrier. We go Fugitive, shoot and sprint, very basic stuff. Domino effect for fire rate and reload speed. Eraser, I said, is for that extra double dip, and it's just a good skill to always have. Sheer Wheel's kind of a dump point, but it's good for the cooldown rate. Keep in mind that the extra cooldown rate after crit does not apply to Mantis, it applies to everything else, so it'll help our barrier cooldown. The base 5% we have here from the 1 point will affect Mantis though. So this, if you ever go this, it's mainly for your second action skill. And then for the augments, I like to go Colder Shoulder so I can ADS with Our Man Flynt, shoot an enemy and crit, and then it'll freeze them instantly for Icebreaker. You can still freeze enemies with Brain Freeze, but this is just a nice quick insta freeze. And then I go Proliferation for just more Mantis charges is all it's used for. No Way Out is good because of the debuff, but the cooldown can kind of suck, but it's not too bad because we constantly have topped off up, so we still have high cooldown rate. But if you shoot an enemy with your Mantis, hit them, and then No Way Out pulls the enemy towards you, and using this flash gun, you're most likely gonna kill yourself, so that's why we don't go No Way Out. And then Blue Tree, we go the basic Violent Momentum, Violent Speed. We're still going regular gun stuff because it is going to be strong base hits. Cool Hand for reload speed. Salvation for shooting. Status effects won't help us or won't heal us with this. That's fine because we're constantly shooting. You don't go any Cold War because the swapping won't help much and the cryo bonus doesn't help with status effects. Of course, seeing red for activating kill skills, violet violence for shooting faster, and then I go 3 good misfortune, usually with barrier, just because it's usually just better at keeping up and then having some borrowed time. For either sentinel or clone, I'll go 1 good misfortune, but going 3 good misfortune is always comfortable with barrier. And I go only 1 playing dirty. This is mainly for my slower shooting projectiles because trying to keep it up normally isn't helpful. And I also have some multi-projectile stuff or just super fast shooting stuff where it doesn't really matter too much. And then we pretty much just go down to duct tape mod for some slash immunity. We're still using status effects, so the status effects can and will kill you, but it can save you a little bit of time sometimes. We go pretty mutants just for magazine size, borrowed time for action skill duration, and then duct tape mod for the splash immunity. And then we go green tree mainly for brain freeze, but because we're going to brain freeze, we can get barrier, which will give us amp damage, which will help boost our base damage shot for applying status effects. And I like to go ready for action here just because of the shield recharge rate and delay. You could go adrenaline if you want more cooldown, but I just preferred ready for action in this build. And all that matters is you get all rounder, you get a nice barrier protecting you. Clone is definitely better at protecting you, but for this build, I prefer the amp damage. I hope you guys enjoyed the build video. This build has really grown on me, and it's crazy that this wasn't found sooner. And I have a couple of ideas how to take advantage of Our Man Flynt in regular gun builds that we might see in the future. I'll probably also adjust some builds, mainly with radiation and red explosions. I think radiation guns will kind of be a higher priority in mobbing now. Radiation is usually just like you have some good sorts of radiation, usually not the gun because of low base damage, but with Our Man Flynt, it takes the element of the gun. So there's some spicy stuff that could happen, which I am excited for. Again, you can find the save file in my Discord, which is linked down below, as well as my other socials. If you haven't, I would really appreciate it if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.